Well, greetings everybody. Welcome to our King's channel. We got a lot to discuss today, so we need to get right to it. Today is the 24th of March. When I woke up 4 o'clock this morning, I was thinking tonight at sunset was going to be the Passover, and I was incorrect. It is tomorrow night, the 25th, Thursday, which is the 5th day of the week. The 25th, Thursday at sunset, will begin the Passover at evening. And I know there's a lot of you that are probably, well, not a lot, there isn't many that come to our King's channel to watch. However, I know it can be intimidating, especially if you've never kept Passover before. And if you're an uncircumcised male, then you're going to have to wait again unless you get circumcised today or tomorrow before sunset. And if you do that, I would highly recommend that you wait till next month to keep it. It's the only, and I shouldn't say feast because it's really not a feast day. The feast is unleavened bread, which will take place starting the 26th at sundown on the regular Sabbath. Will be the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where we need to eat unleavened bread every day. But I'd like to clear up some things for you. We'll march through a lot of stuff here. We're going to munch on some scriptures right now so that it might be able to take a lot of the questions out of the way as to what we should do and how we should act on this special occasion. If you're a circumcised male or if you're a circumcised woman, in heart, in mind, in ears, in mouth, if you're circumcised, eat it. But if you're not circumcised, you'll be eating damnation to yourself. So please don't do so, no matter how much you love keeping the laws, because if you eat it uncircumcised, you'll be breaking the laws and bringing condemnation to your own head. So here we are in Exodus 12 verse 1. It says, "Now Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month every man shall take for himself a lamb." Now it's not just a lamb. It'll show you down here in verse 5 where it tells you to take it from the sheep or from the goats. So anyway, you take yourself a lamb or a goat according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household or a goat. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons. According to each man's need, you shall make the count for the lamb. So that's on the 10th day you're to pen it up. It says, "Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or of the goats." And see, the problem is today, unless it's a real believer that's raising the animals, man, it's just scary to try to find one out there that has no blemish, and I hate to say it this way, but there are people out there actually having relations with their animals. I had sold goats at one time to those that I thought was believers, and their boys was out in the field doing things and got caught. That was like horrible. I felt so bad for even selling the goats to them. And another thing that farmers do usually as soon as, a male has been born or whatever, is they'll give it a notch up on the old circumcision. I'll tell you, they cut the stuff right off there, and that would make the animal blemished. So you can't have one that has been deneutered or gilded, I guess you can say. For dogs, they say fixed, and I say they ain't fixed, man. They're broken. And so, like I say, our King's got me in this apartment complex where I can't even own a goldfish. I can have no pets here whatsoever. So penning up a goat on the 10th day, if I could find it, or a lamb, and there's no way that I can do so on my bicycle. I haven't seen a goat or a sheep farmer since I've been back to New York. And our King knows there's just no way possible for it, and I feel horrible. And I pray you forgive me for it. And I did go out and I bought some cubed lamb on the 10th day, and I koshered it like that's supposed to help. But it's like the law for circumcision is on the 8th day. You can still keep the Passover if you got circumcised on the 9th day, or your 29th year, your 59th year of life. And that's sort of like how I'm hoping that our King's going to look at this, because I know a lot of us, there's no way that you can get a goat and have a place to roast it the way that it's prescribed to do. There's no place here for me to do that either. And we used to have these big old, looked like beehives, that we used to roast our lambs and goats in. We used to do it just the way it says here, you know, and it kills me that I can't anymore. But our King knew what was going on when they had thrown me in jail there for 44 days and starved me and burned down my house and my vehicle at the same time, and causing me to have to flee from Texas to New York, where, being old as I am and everything, I still can't afford a vehicle. Isn't that a shame? But our King wants me to be this way, and so I just ask his forgiveness for it. So anyway, here in Exodus 12:6 it says, "Now you shall keep it up. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day." Now please note this, people, you know, my brothers, my sisters, my friends, my foes, you know, I've had a few of those, and I still love them. I pray for them every day, hoping they'll just repent. But please notice here, it says, "Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month." And so if a day actually started, and it does, okay, a day will start in the morning at dawn, because the light part of a day is called day. The dark part is called night. But the entirety of the dark and the light together is also known as a day. Now, if a day actually started at sunup, everyone would be breaking the day of Passover, because you're to keep the lamb or the goat up until the evening. You're to kill it at the twilight, which would take place here on the 25th of March at the sundown. The twilight, there's only one twilight for every day. The twilight for the 25th took place on what they call the 24th, when the sun set. Well, that was the twilight for the 25th. The twilight for the 26th of March will take place the 25th at sundown. And that's when you are to kill the lambs or the goats. And of course, if you don't have one that you could pen up and do so with, I highly recommend that you get some lamb or goat and start barbecuing it here at sunset. And you'll see how you are to keep the Passover. And we're also going to get into showing why our King was not this Passover lamb, and our King never even ate the Passover that year. Our King laid his life down sometime prior to the Passover. Doesn't say exactly when, from what I've seen, but it certainly says before the Passover, our King laid his life down for us. So anyway, here on the 22nd was the 10th day. That was the 10th, the 23rd is the 11th, 24th is the 12th, 25th is the 13th day, and there at sundown begins the 14th day at evening. And yes, I know it's dark outside when the day starts, but that entire period from sundown to sundown is also considered a day. And usually when you're listening to any newscast or something, if it isn't going on right then, they'll say, on the day of March 22nd, and sometimes they'll say 10 o'clock at night, but they'll say day because it's just a normal, natural thing in people's vocabulary. But some people run off and have to create new things, have something new all the time so they can feel more holy or something. I don't understand it. I don't know what it's about. It's such a simple thing. We're to keep the 10 commandments by keeping the give or take 613 laws, which are listed in the 613 commandments. You won't find them in the 10 commandments. You'll find them in the 613 give or take commandments, also known as laws. And the only difference between the laws and the commandments, the laws actually show you how to keep the commandments, but the commandments everybody can keep. Everybody can keep them. But there are certain laws that only apply to a man or a woman, but as a body of believers, a body of Messiah, between us all, as that body, we are functioning and keeping each and every one of the commandments and the laws. Striving to anyway. So let's get back here to Exodus again. Exodus 12:6. It says, now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Talking about the lamb or the goat. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. But here it says till the 14th day, but yet you kill it at twilight. We don't have to complicate it. The 14th day starts at the 13th day, sundown. The twilight begins for the 14th day. And you kill it right there after the sundown. Real simple. It's not complicated. We can complicate things to where we complicate ourselves right out of the kingdom if we're not careful and prove all things. Please, if you got any questions on what a day is, I just brought out a few videos our king led me to do for a certain young man that refused to even look at them, you know. Took all that time to explain to him, but then he kept writing in comments afterwards, wanting to know why I wouldn't answer him as to what a day is. And I kept saying, watch the video. And he come back and asked me again, why aren't you answering me? And it's like, boy, I love you, man, but this is ridiculous. And then he said he's leaving the channel and giving up on me, and I think that's fine. I'll keep him in my prayers. I hope y'all do too. And our Father will be with you if you keep the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as we should. Our Father, through His righteous Son, is going to be there with us. He promises these things. So anyway, you kill it at twilight, and they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Now please understand and read this. It says, then they shall eat the flesh on that night. See, there you are, on that night. But here it talks about penning it up on the 14th day, killing it at twilight, putting the blood on the doorpost and the lintel there with hyssop, and they're to eat it, the flesh, that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Well, it doesn't look like my dandelions are going to come up unless they pop up here overnight or something, because I checked out in the yard earlier and there was only a rabbit. It was interesting how the rabbit didn't even run up. I stayed there and I shared a little bit of the glad tidings with him, and he just sat there munching on grass, and that was early morning, about 4 o'clock, as I said. I was wanting to go to the store on my bicycle, but it's raining and going to be raining all day. It's like, oh man. But anyway, we're to eat it with unleavened bread. Now please don't be freaking out on me, okay? You still got tomorrow to get prepared for things. I woke up today preparing because I thought it was going to be a sunset tonight, but I was incorrect, and I'm sort of glad for that too, because I still got my unleavened bread that I'm going to be making. You can make it many different ways. You could just remember, you got to get rid of all the leavening from your house and everything. We'll get to that. Now, I highly recommend that you go over here to this lady's video. She'll run you through on how to make tortillas, how to roll them out, how to, she calls fry them. I call it grilling them, because you don't really use any oils or anything to fry it in. But the name of her channel is Off Grid Victory. And this was from March 27, 2018. And what I do is I just put in here how to make unleavened tortillas, and I clicked on it and this video came up. And what I liked about it was a nice little blessing. This is how she starts out the video.
Shalom, saints. Well, Passover.
Okay, shalom, saints. Well, Passover starting. You can see over here on the bread bag she's using there that it actually looks like the barley that's already in the head. And she's also got sprouts going, and so she's believing in eating healthy. So I do highly recommend you go over here, because it's going to save a lot on this video. I was wanting to bring forth my Ninja to show you how I make it. And I was going to bring my flour and everything in here. I mean, I've got cameras, but they just don't seem to be able to upload to the computer or something when I do it. But anyway, this here is my Ninja. and it sets on a big 14 horsepower motor. And all I do is I'll put 3 or 4 cups of flour in here. I don't even measure anything really when it comes to my unleavened bread making. But I'll put in 3 or 4 cups of flour in here. What I like to do is I'll take a stick of butter, you know, whether it's only half or the full stick, it doesn't, it's whatever I feel like at the time. And I'll put it in this thing and I'll let it blend on the dough setting. So for 30 seconds, it's just beating that butter right into the flour. And you want to make sure your flour doesn't have the enriched things in there, those poisons you don't want to be eating. If you can find it, like Walmart has got organic flour that doesn't have any of the enrichments to it. I mean, these companies lie all the time. They're not enriching it at all. But anyway, after I get all the butter incorporated into the flour, and it'll be a little bit crumbly, then I'll add some warm water and I'll run it through again. And you just want to make sure that your dough's not too sticky, but you want it to come out with the same sort of texture as this lady has there. And I also have this is what I use for making my tortillas. And you don't have to have one of these. I got this special for the feast, especially. I mean, I do use it at other times when I make my own tortillas, my own unleavened bread. And another thing you could do with the dough is you can add sugar and honey. You could put nuts in there, coconut. If you can find clean chocolate chips, there are some organics from Walmart that I found that were clean. And I've used them a couple times. I just discovered them here a couple months ago. But anyway, you can mix up the dough like this and make cookies out of it that are unleavened. Don't put any leavening in there. Don't use baking powder. Do not use baking soda. You need to get it out of your houses. But anyway, you can make cookies. You can't really make cake. You don't want them too awful thick, you know, but if you make them about that thick, they're rather enjoyable. Even though it's supposed to be the bread of affliction that we're eating, they can still be really tasty. And so let's further a little bit here. It says, then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Now, if you don't have bitter herbs that you know of, it's an herb that has a bite to it. Dandelions are considered a bitter herb, but so is like oregano, okay? So you can look up online what is considered to be bitter herbs, and hopefully you have some, because you really need to eat it with this meal as well as the unleavened bread. And I'm going to tell you, out there in the stores, I don't think you'll find any unleavened bread. Even with the tortillas that are clean, many of the tortillas they make have lard in them, and you certainly don't want to use lard. In fact, use this time of the year to get rid of all that junk that you got in your cupboards and all those nasty things you may have been feeding your family, and then don't bring them back in the house anymore, you know. Get your houses in order for our King and our Heavenly Father to come. It says, they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. It says, do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head and its legs and its entrails. In other words, the whole enchilada is to be cooked in its entirety. And I know some are probably thinking, oh, but it's got all the hair on it and everything, got all that fur, man. But I'll tell you what, it'll all peel right off there, you know. But boy, it's really, really great. Sounds awful, smell of burning hair isn't the greatest, but it's truly delicious. And Exodus 12:10 says, you shall let none of it remain until morning. And then it says immediately after, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. In other words, you should try your best to eat it all up. And of course, you're not going to be eating the bones, and you're not to break the bones either, nor should you cut the bones. The bones are to be left whole and then burned up completely in the morning. And of course, you know, the reason it's saying You shall let none of it remain until morning, is because you should eat it up. It already told you. If there's too much of it, like it says here, and if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons and such. So then you should eat it all up before the morning. But if there is some left over, don't freak, okay? It's okay. Because it says, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. See, because once you bring it in the house, you're not to bring it back out until morning. And we'll get into that here in a moment. This is how you're to eat that covenantal meal. It says, and thus you shall eat it. Now get this, please. With a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover. Now I got to tell you, I was sharing an apartment with what were claiming to be true believers. And I was doing this, and it was actually in a different apartment in this very apartment complex, with who I was hoping were true believers. But boy, you know, that Passover was horrible, because all I got was comments about, oh, what a glutton he is. Look at that. He's such a glutton. He's just standing there. He won't even sit down and eat civil. He's got to eat it fast. And how ridiculous, having sandals on. Ain't supposed to wear shoes in the house. And I mean, it went over and over and over. It was like a knife in my heart, you know, listening to these things after I already pointed out to him that this is how it's supposed to be done. But the both of them sat down in their chair and they just, you know, munched it leisurely as they normally would any other meal. And I truly felt ashamed for, you know, actually keeping the Passover with them, but it was in the house that I was sharing, you know, so, or the apartment. But anyway, this is how you're to eat it. Now, if you don't have a staff, you got tomorrow. You can just go out and lop a limb off a tree, you know, and cut the end off to whatever length you need. You got a staff. And if you can't do that, if there's a way you can't get to a tree, or you love trees too much that you could never cut one or anything, believe you me, pruning things is the way to make it produce even better. And plants thrive on being pruned. But if you still got an adversity to doing such a thing, it's okay. Just take an old mop handle or something, your broom, unscrew it or whatever, and you can have a little makeshift staff there. So there's really no excuse why you can't do this. And if you don't have sandals, I highly recommend you go down to Dollar Tree. You can pick up a pair of sandals for $1 in tax. Here in New York, it's like, you know, $1.08, I think it is, $1.08. And you can have a pair of sandals. And if you don't have a belt for your waist, get yourself a length of rope. There's nothing wrong with using a rope as a belt. They used to do it in those days all the time. And that's what it's saying. You just have to have something on your waist, a belt. And if you're thinking more spiritual, think about what the belt is. It's the truth, the belt of truth, okay? So this is part of the armor of our Father that we are to wear while we eat that meal, the way He tells us to do it. And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover. For I'll pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt. Our Father's against all the gods, period, and our Father is not a god. Men created those errors, taught to him by demons. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Father. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast of the Father throughout your generations. Now notice it says you shall keep it as a feast, because it's really not a feast. The feasts are set at prescribed times. The Passover, if you were too defiled to eat it in this month, then provisions could be made to keep it next month, but you can't keep unleavened bread next month. Well, you can in disobedience. This month is the month for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, starting on this very seventh day Sabbath that is coming. Oh, and something else I did want to show you here on this Farmer's Almanac for March 2021. Please note for the new moon here, the first day here it shows is 0 days. You know, this is actually the first day of the month of Abib, was the 13th of March. The 12th of March at sundown to the 13th at sundown was the first day, but they've got it shown here as 0 days, and then the second day they've got for day 1, the third day they've got for day 2. So I mean, you can see how messed up the whole world is and how we got to watch ourselves continuously. So anyway, back in Exodus 12:14, so this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to Yahweh. Now get this, throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. So now it gets into showing you how to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And it means it. It doesn't say all day long. It means you have to have a piece of unleavened bread every single day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it's great to get the whole family together and break some bread, break some tortillas and everybody eat it together. But I'll tell you another way that I really enjoy tortillas. I make Mexican tortillas, and what I do is I just spread a little spaghetti sauce on there, or pizza sauce, whatever you want to call it. Toss on some onions and some cheese and broccoli or whatever. Throw it in the oven for a while, and man, I tell you what, Mexican pizzas are so great. Just remember, they gotta be unleavened, and I don't think you can find any in the stores. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. And of course, there's nothing wrong with getting that out of your house before that first day. And that's why I was recommending that after the Passover, after you eat the Passover, and then in the morning when you get out to doing your things, I always find it best to get rid of all the leavening by then or during that day. I use it as a preparation day, and it basically is going to be a preparation day for the Sabbath, but you're to remove all the leaven from your houses. Now, something I'm going to try out is I'm going to make up all the leavening that I do have, and I'm going to turn it into a smoothie and just pour it down the toilet. Remember, if you got breadcrumbs or panki, I believe it's called, the Japanese breadcrumbs, they're all leavened. They have to be put out. If you have baking soda and you use the box to make up some leavened foods during the year, toss the box. Personally, as I showed in other videos, I'll pour off some into baggies that I'll use from the baggie to do my leaven stuff, wherein I use my box there, for cleaning the oven and other things if I get extreme indigestion, which I seldom do. But if my stomach gets hurting too bad, I'll make me up a little bit of baking soda and some water and drink it down and produce some pretty heavy duty burps, I'll tell you, depending on how much acid you got built up there. But if you've been using it right straight from the box, and these are just my thoughts because there's nowhere in scripture it speaks about baking soda, but it talks about leavening. And if you was using that box specifically for leavening, just toss it. Stuff's cheap. If you got cream of tartar, if you've got yeast. Now, if you've got nutritional yeast, it's not used for making bread to rise, even though you can add it to bread just like you can with oatmeal or something. You can put oatmeal into bread, and you can put coconut into bread if you want to. It's just an ingredient. Nutritional yeast is actually dead. Has a lot of nutrition in it, but it's not going to spring to life to make bread rise. So you can keep your nutritional yeast. Now, as far as having popcorn in the house, I've heard some saying, oh no, you can't because it's a grain that will rise, it will pop because of the moisture inside, and sometimes, you can have steam as a leavening agent, but I don't know how much I would agree with any of that because popping corn certainly isn't going to make bread rise. And I know when you're making tortillas that sometimes, well, most of the time, if you got the proper batter, it's going to puff up. But that doesn't mean that it's leavened, okay? If you don't put any leavening agents in there, heat will make steam and it will make things rise up a bit, but that's not turning your tortillas into a leavened bread. It's not leavened. You have to add leavening into the flour, into the dough, in order to have a leavened bread. But if you don't put any leavening into the dough, then it's not going to come out as a leavened bread unless you leave it out for days or whatever for yeast to get on it and to do its thing. But again, let's not be drama queens or anything over this. It's actually pretty simple. But you'll remove the leaven from your houses for whoever eats unleavened bread. Now get this. This is how serious this is. It says whoever eats leavened bread from the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread until the seventh day, and it's talking about it ending after the feast is done. If you eat leavening during the feast, it says here that person must be cut off from Israel. That word shall means must. And it says here, on the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat. So, for the feasts, even though they fall on a regular day out of the week and not the weekly Sabbath. Now, this feast is falling on a regular Sabbath to start it off, a regular seventh-day Sabbath. So you're not even going to be allowed to cook what you need then. You treat it just like a regular seventh-day Sabbath. Some say it's a high holy day, but there is a difference on those that fall on a regular Sabbath day. So let's say that this fell on a Thursday, or a Wednesday, or a Tuesday, or a Monday, or even a Sunday. Say the first day of the feast was on one of those days and not the regular Sabbath day, then it would be that no manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So the only work you're to do if the Feast of Unleavened Bread falls on any other day but the seventh-day Sabbath. If it falls in the seventh-day Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath is not nullified. You're still not allowed to cook. But there's nothing wrong with making a PB&J or warming up what you already prepared for that day. But this is speaking of the instance of the feast falling on any of the other 6 days. But that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. Verse 17, so you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for on this same day I have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. So it must be important enough for you to know this is to be celebrated, to be observed, to be practiced, to be kept throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. I mean, look right up here. Verse 14, it says, you shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. And of course, that's speaking of the Passover. This is speaking of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It says in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, which is the Passover, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses. Since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. That's how serious this is. You don't eat leaven during this feast. You want it out of your house. It says it shall not be found in your houses. So if you're vacuuming and such, and you got regular rugrats around eating bread everywhere and dropping their crumbs, and you vacuum, make sure you get rid of all the contents of your vacuum cleaner as well, because sometimes the clumps are big enough you can see the leaven. Make sure you get into your couches and your chairs and everything. You never know how many cookies you're going to find, and seldom find pieces of cake, because children love cake. And cake doesn't end up like I used to have with my youngins, where the VHS player, which actually took place about the third or fourth day into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we're going to put on something in the VHS and discovered a PB&J in there. A full sandwich, wasn't even chewed on. Sitting right inside the VHS player, so that was a horrible thing. We didn't check in there when we were looking and searching for leavening to get out of the house and leavened items. There's no leaven that shall be found in your houses. Since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread. And it's important enough for these things to be re-elaborated on. Here in verse 21, then Moshe called for all the elders of Israel. Then Moses called for the elders of Israel and said to them, pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families, and kill the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And I used to do this. If I tried doing that in this apartment, they would most likely kick me out. And it's a pity that our father's laws are hated so much in this land. It says, and none of you, now please understand this. It says, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. Please let that sink in. Once you bring in the lamb or the goat that you barbecued there, and you shut the door, don't go back out of your house until morning, unless the house is on fire. You can't praise our Father from the grave, and that's about the only excuse for anybody being disobedient. And then out of the necessity, it's like an ox in the ditch, if your house is on fire, you need to get out and not die. But otherwise, you are not to go out of your house. And none of you shall go out of the door. Now, this doesn't mean you can climb out a window or climb up the chimney. It's not saying that. It's saying don't leave your house. We don't need to complicate things. We don't need an encyclopedia to explain to us what it's meaning when it says you shall not go out the door of his house until morning. It means don't go outside. Which leads us to some scriptures that I do want to show you concerning our King and our Savior. Now here in Matthew chapter 26, I believe most of y'all are familiar with Matthew 26, and if you're not, please read. In fact, read it all anyway. And also the prior chapters, because they're speaking of this time that was the last few days of our King's life in a human body, I guess you can say, which ended prior to the Passover. And we'll show you that right here. Anybody that keeps the laws and commandments should be able to have seen these things if our King opened up the understanding for them. And hopefully our King will open up the understanding for you when I read these, and you'll say, wow, how could we have been so deceived our whole life? It's because the whole world's deceived. Revelation 12 verse 9 tells you the whole world's deceived. That's why it takes 144,000 in these last days to dispel all these deceptions. that were just added to the scriptures. Our king never became a Passover sacrifice. Now his blood, and our king being considered the lamb, is for the Passover from our sinful lives. When we realize we've been sinning and we start keeping the 10 Commandments by the give or take 613 laws, and it's how you get into that new covenant. Well, our king's blood is what enacted the new covenant. When you get the laws written in your inward part, in your hearts, in your mind, in your soul, in your every fiber of your DNA, to where you're saying, I'm going to keep Passover if you're circumcised, but definitely keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, whether you're circumcised or not. And people, there's nothing wrong with giving your children gifts. I mean, they got this Christmas day out there that they worship the gods for one day a year there, where they shower each other with gifts. Well, there's nothing wrong with gifts. The problem is Christmas, it's Nimrod's birthday. But during the feasts, you got the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you got the Feast of Pentecost, you got the Feast of Tabernacles. There's nothing wrong with showering your gifts on those feasts to your children so they learn to love the feast. It's a time of giving, it's the time we should be singing and gathered with each other. Of course, I'm saying this, here I am stuck in my prison cell. And that's why I'll be making videos for the upcoming feast, so that if you're in the same predicament as me, we can still have a holy convocation. All you got to do is listen to a video, and we'll praise our Heavenly Father through His righteous Son. And we could have a holy convocation together. But you can see up here, in Matthew 26:23, it says, He answered and said, talking our king, He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. So you can see this is talking about Judas here and such, which then took off to go to the rabbis and the Pharisees, the priests, and made them all Sadducees. But Judas went to make the arrangements to bring the Roman soldiers and such to arrest our king on this night. And they had this, what they considered a Last Supper. Now, even though it says here, which is incorrect, it says, now on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Messiah, saying to him, where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? Well, anybody that knows what the feasts are and such can see that there's something mighty fishy going on right there, because why would it be? And you notice here as well that this is italicized, where they've got now the first day of the feast. Those words were added. It said, now on the first of unleavened bread, meaning these people were just getting into the town, going to go celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The disciples went to our king, saying to him, where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? And the proof and evidence of this is found in Leviticus chapter 23, as it shows right here, Leviticus 23:4. These are the feasts of Yahweh, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. On the 14th day of the first month at twilight is Yahweh's Passover. So here you've got on the 14th day of the month, Passover. And then it says, and on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the day after Passover is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and yet they wrote these scriptures in such a way that it makes it sound as though they're already the first day into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when the disciples went to him saying, where do you want us to prepare to eat the Passover, which was to be eaten the day before the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Now truly y'all can see that, right? So this scripture here is misleading. Men, they probably had no understanding of how or when to even eat the Passover, helped with the translation of these scriptures. But I'm thinking the way it should have been written was they were speaking of when they got to Jerusalem and were going to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then the disciples went to our Messiah, saying to him, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And as you see, they're not even set up for keeping the feast yet. They just got into the place to where they're going to, and our Messiah said to them, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples." Well, it's true. That's probably what our king said for them to do. But you'll see our king never did keep the Passover. And I don't know what the purpose was in twisting these scriptures or whatever when they translated them. And then again, if they're not mistranslated, you'd have to consider that our king just didn't want the disciples to know at that time that he wasn't going to be actually keeping the Passover with them, as he may not wanted to make them all sorrowful for what was going to take place too far in advance. So the disciples did as Yahshua had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. Now they didn't prepare the Passover in killing the lamb or the goat. They simply got things in order, They made sure they got unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They made sure they had their staves and sandals and a belt for their waist. And now a place they've got here that they're getting together that they're going to stay in. So anyway, they're out here and they're getting things ready for the Passover. I'm doing it. I've been doing it since the beginning of this month, maybe even a little earlier. I've been checking places out, making sure I didn't have a stash of crackers or something. So the disciples did as Yahshua had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When evening had come, he sat down with the 12. Now, it's not saying this is Passover evening. It doesn't say that anywhere. All it shows is that evening came, he sat down with his 12. Now, as they were eating, he said, "Assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." And he goes on speaking of these things. Read it for yourself. That was considered the Last Supper. But even convicts, if they're on death row, they get a special meal for the last meal they'll ever eat before they're executed. And that is considered the Last Supper, okay? But this had nothing to do with Passover or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They are only preparing to keep those days. So anyway, our Messiah, he took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, said, "This is my body." With the wine, he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." Now, I do highly recommend you go to Timothy P's channel. The last video he brought this out in detail, so I'm not even going to really get into that part. But anyway, if this was the Passover that they were actually eating, then this would have been sinful. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out of the door of the place they was staying, and they went to the Mount of Olives. Now, part of the prerequisite of our king being our king is that he never sinned. Here again in Exodus 12, as it states here, Exodus 12:22, these are words of Moshe. And this is why so many people just can't hear what I'm saying, because I speak our king's language. And those that have ears to hear and eyes to see, it's only because you're doing the same thing here that the world denies. Most all religions out there tell you cannot keep the laws and commandments. They're impossible to keep. And yet I show them I'm wearing my tassels and seats, that I'm preparing for the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that I'm not stealing their car or trying to seduce their wife or children. And they would accept me even better, I think, if I were. And that's how screwed up this world has gotten. But anyway, like our king says, here in John 5, verse 42, he says, "But I know you, that you do not have the love of the Father in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me." You don't accept me. If another comes in his own name, Jimmy Swagger, Peter Popoff, Kenny Copeland, I think his name is, the guy that, you could see the demons just jumping out him when you even insinuate that you shouldn't have to pay tithe because you don't have money coming in your house. The guy's hilarious. But our king said, if another comes in his own name, him you will receive. How can you believe? Now, please understand these things. How can you believe who receive honor from one another and do not seek the honor that comes from the Father only? This is of ultra importance. If you cannot hear the truth that you should be keeping Passover if you're circumcised males, that you should keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that you should walk in the every living word. If you cannot hear these things yet, please, I'm going to explain why in our King's own words. It says, do not think. Now, in Matthew 5, verse 17, our King started that verse out with the very same words. Do not think I came to do away with the law or the prophets. It didn't come to do away with or abolish, but to fulfill, to keep them all, so you could see how to keep them yourself. And our King said there, do not think, and then the whole world thinks that he came to do away with the law and commandments when he just said, do not think. He's saying the same thing here. Do not think. Don't contemplate. Don't consider. Don't let the thought enter your little mind. Don't think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. Now, he may not be speaking in a way that the Christians out there would accept him because they don't accept Moses. But our king in those days was in a land where our father's temple was still established and being used. Our king actually sent lepers and such when they were healed to those priests, bringing the required sacrifices that was necessary in the law while the temple was there, to where they'd have been shaved and everything, inspected. They had certain sacrifices they had to bring. There was a protocol for the lepers when they were cleansed to go through before the priests. So our king is speaking here to those people that were actually supposed to be upholding the laws and commandments, and instead they were upholding traditions of men from the Talmud. But our king's saying to them, I'm not going to accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. And to those people, that meant something. To a Christian today, they don't believe Moses anyway, so it has no impact on them unless they're given these ears to hear and eyes to see by our king somewhere down the road in their journey. Now, I'm hoping that because you're here at our king's channel to hear these things, that you're going to hear what our king says here as to why the rest of the world can't understand the truth. And our king said, do not think I shall accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moshe, in whom you trust. Now get this. For if you believed Moses, if you believed you're supposed to keep Pentecost and Passover, Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Day of Atonement, Feast of Trumpets, no more Christmas, no more Easter, no more Valentine's Day, which, by the way, if you would receive a rose on Valentine's Day, if you were in the old Roman days, it meant you were invited to an orgy. But our king, speaking to the priests, the scribes, the Pharisees and such, he says, for if you believed Moshe, you would believe me. Why? For he wrote about me. Now please understand, this is why the world is blind. Anyone says the laws are done away with, they do not know our king to begin with. And our king's going to explain why they can't hear what our king has to say. Yeshua says, but if you do not believe Moshe's writings, his writings, how will you believe my words? So if you're not believing what Moshe wrote, if you're not keeping the seventh day Sabbath and keeping it holy, If you're not practicing every day to live by the 10 commandments and the give or take 613 laws, well, that's why you can't hear the things that I'm bringing forth for you. But if you can hear it, then you need to stay adhered to all the words that Moshe brought so that you can get on that road to becoming perfect. Like it says, I believe in Matthew chapter 5, the last verse says you are to be perfect as your Father in heaven art perfect. And what perfect means is keeping the laws and commandments. Psalms 19, David said. Well, let's take a look. Psalms 19:7, it says, the law of the Father is what? It's perfect. It converts the soul. And the testimony of the Father is sure. Doing what? It makes wise the simple. Those that never been to a college can become wise if they were to start keeping the laws and commandments. But if you want to become perfect, this is how you do it. The laws of the Father is perfect, and it converts the soul. And remember, even Kepha, our Messiah, told him just that when he is converted, he wanted him to feed his sheep, the people. But Kepha wasn't even converted at the time that our king had been teaching for however long our king was there teaching. None of the disciples yet had been perfected. They hadn't even been converted yet. In fact, after our king laid his life down, what'd they do? They all went off doing their thing. Our king had to come back from the dead to gather them back together again and let them know they needed to be there on the day of Pentecost, where he gave unto them, and even uncircumcised men that was out in the parking lot received Holy Spirit because they was at the place they were told to be. And if you want Holy Spirit, you need to be keeping the laws and commandments because that's how you get it. The law of Yahweh is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of Yahweh is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Father are right. They're righteous, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Father is pure, enlightening the eyes. And then this fear, the fear of Yahweh is clean and enduring forever. The judgments of the Father are true and righteous altogether. And yes, more to be desired are they than gold, and than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. And you should be eating your honey and butter every day too. But what does it these do? It says, moreover, by them your servant is warned. Yeah, he's warned. If you do this when I said not to, you're going to die. If you don't do this when I said to, you're going to die. Moreover, by them your servant is warned, and in keeping them there is great reward. Keeping what? Like it says, the laws, the law of Yahweh and the commandments. You got the 10 commandments of Yahweh that are pure, enlightening the eyes, and you have the give or take 613 laws of Yahweh, which are perfect, and they convert the soul. And he says, and in keeping them there is great reward. But the world is telling you, no, you can't keep them laws and commandments. You can't work for the kingdom. Oh, it's a curse if you try to keep them. I mean, you hear all this hockey puck, going on out there, and it's not right. We need to be serving our Heavenly Father the way He wants us to serve Him. But as you can see here in Exodus 12:22, after you brought in this lamb or goat in your house to devour it says, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. So therefore, here we are with our king and the disciples, our king having his last supper. Nothing to do with Passover, because if it was, well, it says here, and here it says in Matthew 26:30, it says, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. They went out of their door and went to the Mount of Olives. Now, our king would have never sinned. If he did do that, then he wouldn't be our Messiah. Our Messiah is sinless. So right there should show you that this was not a Passover meal, this Last Supper, because they would have never gone out of the house that night to go to the Mount of Olives. And you can see it is actually at night here in Matthew 26:34. Yahshua said to him, assuredly I say to you that this night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Poor Kepha, man, you know. And then our king's got this marvelous tact, you know. I mean, he lets Kepha know what he done after, you know, Kepha denied him 3 times. Our king had a way to remind him. He says, hey, Kepha, do you love me? And he had him do it 3 times, and Kepha was pretty grieved from it, especially when Kepha says, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples. But Kepha denied him 3 times before the rooster crowed there twice. So anyway, here it is that night. They've gone out. They sang a hymn. They went out to the Mount of Olives. Then it shows here in verse 36, Matthew 26, then Yahshua came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, sit here while I go and pray over there. And hopefully the rest of y'all know the rest of the story here. But anyway, with the story, however, which way you want to think of it in your mind as taking place, some of the disciples say that Judas came up, kissed our king. Another story says that the centurion comes up and our Messiah says, who are you looking for? And he says, I'm looking for Yahshua of Nazareth. And Yahshua said, well, I am he. And they all fell backwards. And he didn't have none kissing going on or nothing there. But anyway, it was that very night that our Messiah was arrested. And then he was beaten all night long. And you could see that in these stories. And that's why the rooster crowed, okay? It was, our Messiah was arrested sometime in the night when our king would have never left the door if it was a Passover. They'd had to gone to our king's place where he was staying and busted the door down to get him. But it wasn't Passover. And the last piece of evidence I'll show you on this, because I want to keep this short as I can. And we have to go to the book of Al-Yahnai or John for this part, because it wasn't shown in Matthew 26 as it's shown here in Al-Yahnai 28. But you can see up here in Al-Yahnai 18:25, it talks about Simon Kepha. Now Simon Kepha stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, you are not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Kepha cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? Kepha then denied him, and immediately a rooster crowed. So this is early morning, just like it says here in Al-Yahnai 18:28. It says, then they led Yahshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium. They're bringing him out to get judged. And it was early morning. Now get this, those that led our king to Caiaphas, to the praetorium early in the morning, those that led him, it says, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium. Well, certainly, if they're wanting to have our king murdered to save the Jewish nation or whatever it was that they were thinking in their minds, they didn't go into the praetorium. And why? Please get this. Lest they should be defiled. But you got to realize the praetorium is where they murdered a lot of people. And to be cleansed from death took the ashes of the red heifer, and it took 7 days to clean, to become cleansed, so you're no longer defiled by the death that was in the praetorium. Because when somebody dies, if you've got an open cup of coffee, you can't drink the coffee in a room some guy just died in. Anything that's got a cap off it or whatever is supposed to be destroyed. These things are in the law. You know, when someone dies, they lose like 21 grams, just like that. They just disappear. They put people that were dying on these metal trays that if you peed or pooped your pants, all the weight would stay right in the tray. And at the moment of someone's death, they lose like 21 grams. Poof, just like that. So the way I look at what goes on when somebody dies is when they die, you got these things in you, parasites, whatever they may be. And as soon as you die, boy, they're gone. They're gone out looking for someone else. Like buckshot, just everywhere. And it defiles everything so bad that you need the ashes of the red heifer to be cleansed. At least that was until our King has been given that power and authority to cleanse us himself. But anyway, they didn't go into the praetorium lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So you can see right here that our King was already arrested, beaten all night long, brought to the praetorium in the morning. Had it been Passover, and if our King was that Passover lamb to where you don't have to keep Passover anymore, well, what occurred to the Passover goat who became it? And our King would have been killed in the evening of the 14th day. But this wasn't the evening of the 14th day. This is the morning of some day that is not even yet the Passover. These people didn't go into the praetorium because they wanted to eat the Passover. I'm hoping y'all can see these things and understand another thing which I brought out in other videos. Our King was not this Passover sacrifice. They did not slice our King's throat. They did not pour his blood into a basin. Nobody took hyssop and put the blood of our King on the lintels and the doorpost. Nobody roasted our King with its head and entrails and everything, and then ate them with whatever was left over his sun up when they could come back outside their houses. Nobody burned up our King's body. So he did not be this Passover sacrifice. And yes, the Passover is to be kept by circumcised males and females that wear their tassels or their seats, their fringes or lots, whichever you prefer to call them, eating butter and honey, that believe the every word of Moshe. Because if you don't believe Moshe, then you can't hear our King's words. Even 1 Yachanan or 1 John chapter 2, 3 through 6 will tell you. If you think you know our King, you say you know him, and you do not keep the commandments, well, it's because you're a liar. Not those who are keeping the commandments and the laws, but you are the liar. And there's no truth, no light in you. If you say you even know our true Messiah and you do not keep the commandments, if you want life, keep the commandments. Our King was very specific in telling us these things. But anyway, I know you got a lot to do. I got a lot to do. I got some unleavened bread I got to be making up here. And I just took all my sourdough starter, yes, and make sure you get rid of it. I did mine a couple days ago, and I made me up a nice ball of dough, the last one from that starter, and I'm making me up some pizza for today, and I'll eat it today and tomorrow. And all the leavening that I do find in my house, as I said, I'm going to make a smoothie out of it, pour it right down the toilet. Not even have to worry about these things anymore. So let's get ready for the feast. I do love y'all. Let's prepare. Our King wants to come and visit you. And so I do love you all. I keep the laws and commandments. And I know if you keep the laws and commandments too, the every word of Moshe, the every living word of the scriptures, then you love me too, because you hear our King's voice. With that, bye.